started with some introductions. So my name is Alexa Gasky. I am an Assistant Director of Admission for Gonzaga University, and I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Everett. I'm the Dean of Student Financial Services here at Gonzaga. So I work really with the financial aid, student accounts, and student employment offices and a number of other services related to financing education that fall sort of under the Student Financial Services umbrella. My job is to make sure students and families have access to financial aid and the resources that they need to pay for school, that they can understand the cost of attending Gonzaga, make arrangements to pay bills, and have access to student employment opportunities. And I'll kick it over to my colleagues in joining me from the financial aid office. We'll start with Louisa.
Hi, my name is Louisa Diana. I'm an Associate Director of Financial Aid, and I work primarily with our federal loan programs, institutional loan programs, and also our federal grants. And I meet with students to help them find funding for their college. And I will turn it over to Maggie.
Betty, my name is Maggie Piscini. I'm a financial aid counselor, and I work primarily with special condition appeals to help families if the information that was submitted on the FAFSA isn't reflecting their current financial situation. And I also see students and families and try to assist them. And I'll turn it over to one of my colleagues in undergraduate admissions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Becky Stockton. I am also an Assistant Director of Admission at Gonzaga. So I'll be hanging out in the chat with my other colleagues, trying to answer as many questions as we can. Levi, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. Glad to see you all made it out here tonight. My name is Levi Garcia Morales. I'm one of the admission counselors here at Gonzaga, and I'll be helping answering your questions in the chat box. And I'll turn it over to Will.
Hey everyone, so glad you could make it tonight. My name is Will Shoup. I'm an admission counselor here at Gonzaga, and I will also be helping out in the chat.
Okay, so we'll pass it on over to Sarah and our colleagues in financial aid.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexa. Before we dive into the FAFSA details, I want to just take a moment and highlight our mission and approach to assisting students and families with the process. So I hope you see through this webinar, through our policies, that we are really committed to Gonzaga's mission, and we see our role not only to assist students and families with resources for attending Gonzaga, but also to develop and educate students through our work. Finances can be deeply personal. Like, we know that really well. We work with families every day, so we really get it. There is going to be a lot of questions here tonight that we probably aren't going to get to. So if you're not, if you don't get your question answered tonight, or if you have more follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to ask us for help. We take a team approach. So we have some general phone lines and email boxes that we send things through, but trust that you're going to get a response probably within an hour or two, at least acknowledging that we received your message. And if not that, within a business day or so. We're well staffed, we're experienced. There's rarely a wait to get a hold of someone, so don't hesitate to take us up on our offer to contact us after this, especially with around this this year is going to be, it's going to be an interesting year. And I think we're going to need to do a lot of help and sort of correcting through this process, and know that we are happy to do that. So as I kind of move on, I want to just right out of the gate really be clear about what this webinar is. And it really is around how to use the FAFSA application to apply for financial aid. So we're going to cover who should apply for aid, what the FAFSA is, the free application for federal student aid. We're going to talk about the changes as a result of recent law changes, legislative changes through the FAFSA Simplification and Future Act. We're going to talk about kind of who should be on the FAFSA, who's the FAFSA parent, and dependency status if students have to report information, their parents' information on the FAFSA. We're going to also talk about how to create and access a studentaid.gov account, which is the account that you will use to complete the FAFSA. And then finally, we'll do a run through at least what we know about what the FAFSA form is going to look like this year. And then we'll have some frequently asked questions about the FAFSA that we've received already or are receiving through the course of our work, and then we'll answer some questions that we're hearing from you all as well. So thank you so much for being here, and let's go ahead and launch the poll that we have just to kind of get a sense of who's in the audience. If you wouldn't mind sort of stating which of these best describes you, and it's not a quiz, there's no wrong answers, just generally trying to make sure that we understand the audience. So awesome, thanks for the quick replies. It looks like most people have responded, and it looks like we have a good mix of parents, which is not too surprising, as well as students. So I will try to be clear in throughout this webinar about kind of what audience we're speaking to or about by differentiating between student and parent, but that was super helpful. Thank you so much for your participation. So again, just to kind of reinforce the purpose of the webinar, I wanted to sort of share this information first and talk about who can apply for financial aid using the FAFSA application. The information in this webinar is going to be geared towards first-year students who are U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens, and then therefore eligible to use the FAFSA to apply for financial aid. If this doesn't describe your citizenship status, please know that there's going to be other ways to apply, but we're not going to go into a ton of detail on this webinar here tonight. And if you're unsure about if you're eligible to use a FAFSA application, that is a great reason to get in contact with our office. I haven't held my promise so far. I promise I'm not going to say, hey, you can get in touch with us on every single slide, but probably a lot of them I will. So just know that the offer stands if you're not sure if you're eligible to use the FAFSA application. That is a great reason to get in touch with us, and we can do some additional research and kind of talk through it with you and make sure that we're directing you to the correct application. So our contact information is up there. It's also easy to find on our website as well. And then another resource that you might be interested in, kind of before we dive into the FAFSA details, I want to highlight a recording we did earlier this fall for a webinar that was called How to Apply for Scholarships and for Financial Aid. We presented this webinar kind of early in the application cycle, and it contains some important information on the types and sources of financial aid available at Gonzaga. We also cover the difference, kind of more in depth about the types of financial aid that the categories of financial aid that you might hear, like the difference between grants and scholarships, loans and student employment. And we go into a lot more detail about scholarship opportunities, different financial aid programs that are available, and as well as the estimated cost to attend Gonzaga. This webinar is available on our website, and we have a link in the chat. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to get access to that as well. Again, we're not going to talk about the type of financial aid available at Gonzaga. We're going to talk about this is focused on the FAFSA application and the changes that are sort of forthcoming. But if you want more information on what's available, this webinar is a great resource that's up on the screen there. So let's talk about who should apply. If you're on this webinar, thank you. But we often hear from families that don't want to do the FAFSA because they think they're not going to qualify for financial aid. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions in our work in financial aid. And while it's true that not everyone may qualify for financial aid, you should absolutely apply if cost isn't a factor on where you're planning to attend. So if you are showing up to this webinar and curious about how to apply, I would just go ahead and say you should apply. The FAFSA form is used to qualify for federal aid and also state financial aid, as well as institutional, which is sort of a fancy word for school-based financial aid. The FAFSA is what we use to determine need-based financial aid, and it's the only application required. It's the only application that we'll use for students who are eligible to use it to determine need-based eligibility. It's also going to determine whether or not a student is eligible for work opportunities, need-based work opportunities, as well as subsidized loans, which are loans that do not earn interest while the student is in school. Gonzaga has a wide array of need-based financial aid programs. including about 10 million in our biggest need-based program, the Gonzaga grant. And on average, Gonzaga students received $11,400 in need-based grants, and about 70% of the students that submitted a FAFSA received need-based grants as a part of their financial aid package. So again, most students who are doing the FAFSA are receiving some additional aid, and $11,000 is a lot of money. That can go a long way in making, college affordable and Gonzaga affordable. I did some research today, just because I was curious and kind of to just reinforce this point. So of the students that received need-based grants from Gonzaga, the median income for these families was around $140,000. So the median means the midpoint, right? So half of the families had incomes below that, half the families had incomes higher than that. So grant eligibility isn't solely based on income. So it's not as if we can just easily say, oh, what's your income? Here's how much you're going to get. But I feel like this is a pretty good indicator that there are need-based financial aid opportunities for middle income families looking to try to make financial aid more affordable. Some other reasons to do the FAFSA, if you're not convinced yet, is that some outside scholarship applications may ask you to complete it. And also if the student, if you're a student and you intend to borrow student loans, you're going to need to complete a FAFSA as well. That's one of the basic eligibility criteria. So hopefully I've made a strong case there and shared some information about why it's worthwhile to go through this process. So let's talk about what the FAFSA is. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it's the form that you need to fill out to receive financial aid from federal, state governments, as well as school-based financial aid to help pay for college. Again, most schools, and Gonzaga is one of them, are going to use this form to determine financial aid eligibility. And this is fairly true. Some schools might require a profile, but that is not super common, particularly on the West Coast. And the FAFSA is usually the application that you need to apply for aid. The FAFSA form is maintained by the United States Department of Education. So each year, over 17 million students are going to be using the form to apply for financial aid. That's a lot of people using the form. And the FAFSA is going to be available online at FAFSA.gov. The FAFSA is free, so the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, that's the acronym. You don't need to pay anyone to prepare it for you. It's not like an IRS tax return. And in fact, this year, more so than any other year, there's not a ton of information. None of us have had any practice with this. So anyone who claims that they know how to do this probably doesn't. You probably have just as much knowledge, more with your own financial information than they would. Another important thing to note is that the FAFSA is an annual form. So you're going to have to submit a FAFSA each academic year that you want to apply for financial aid, if you want to receive loans every year, that sort of thing. And this is also important because there is a FAFSA that's currently available, but that is for students enrolled in the current academic year. So if your plan is to start college next fall, the FAFSA that you need to fill out is not yet available. That annual form is not yet available, but it will be by December 31st. The form is going to be based on your family's 2022 income, and the output is a term known as the SAI or the Student Aid Index. So this is just a high-level overview slide. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on each of these points. So let's go ahead and dive into what's changing with the FAFSA Simplification Act. So you may have heard, and it may actually be why you're here, that this year the FAFSA is undergoing some exciting changes and really long overdue modernization. I heard on a webinar this morning that the technology and the systems that the FAFSA currently runs on is 40 years old. That is very, very old in technology terms. So this is long overdue changes. And because of these changes, that the 24-25 FAFSA is not going to be available until December 31st. Generally, it's available in October. And really all of these changes are good things. Like this is changes that have needed to happen. But this timeline is sort of making things a little bit more compressed than it has in years past. One of the other great things about the FAFSA Simplification Act is that it's expected to expand access to the federal Pell Grant. I think they estimate that around 600,000 students across the country are going to be eligible for Pell that weren't previously eligible before. So that means more students will be eligible for more funding. So all in all, this is a good thing for long overdue changes, but it is sort of a little bit uncertain as we sit here at the end of November, preparing, trying to prepare to help students decide where to attend and if they can afford school next year. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about what on the FAFSA is changing. A few specific changes I'd like to highlight to help you prepare to submit the FAFSA by December 31st. So first of all, know that when the FAFSA becomes available, this like you cannot miss it if you're checking your email, if the news is on. There will be a massive PR campaign from the U.S. Department of Education, from schools, from high school counselors, from school administrators, from college advocates. So just be sure to check your correspondence about it. I know that we at Gonzaga are planning to get information out as soon as we know that it's going to be ready for students to fill out. The language that the Department of Education has said is by December 31st, probably on December 31st, based on how some of this has gone, but there's a chance it may be available sooner. And I'll talk a little bit about the timeline, but know that the FAFSA, you want to be in a space where you can give thoughtful attention to completing the FAFSA application. This isn't like concert tickets or like fill it out at a stoplight, rush to fill it out. So even though that the timeline is delayed, there's still going to be about a month, maybe longer, before schools are going to be able to do much with the data and create financial aid offers and that sort of thing. So while we want to sort of get the word out that the FAFSA is available, we do want people to be in a spot where they can thoughtfully sort of complete the application and not rush through it. And as I mentioned, another change is the output from the FAFSA. Previously, it was known as the expected family contribution, and it's changing to the student aid index. And this student aid index is a number that schools are going to use to determine financial aid eligibility for need-based aid. The SAI is, schools have limited money. Even the U.S. Department of Education and state governments have limited money. So the SAI is really what's used to sort of distribute those resources in a way that's equitable and making sure that we're helping as many students as possible make college affordable. You might find that the SAI is an alarmingly high number. That is common regardless of your family's financial situation. So just know that that's a fairly common reaction after a family's done a FAFSA. One other change to note is that there's going to be fewer questions on the FAFSA and smart logic to help you skip questions that don't apply to your family situation. So if you have older students and have previously done a FAFSA, or if you just wanted to see what the FAFSA was all about and did the one for the 23-24 school year, don't be alarmed that it doesn't look exactly the same. That logic is built in there to make sure that we're only asking the information and the form is as easy as possible. Another great change that I think will make a lot less work for families and for schools is that the information on the FAFSA is going to be transferred from the IRS directly to schools. So being that this is a financial application, we need information about family income. And previously, that information was kind of transferred through the FAFSA to schools, but not very consistently. In this new change, the information is coming from the IRS directly to schools. And trust me, this is just a significant improvement over current processes. It's going to make it way easier for students to verify their own eligibility, and it's going to cause less work and additional requirements to determine and sort of certify eligibility. And finally, there's some new terminology just to be aware of, or if you're new to the FAFSA, just terminology to be aware of is a better way to put it. The new FAFSA is going to have contributors, and this is anyone who's asked to provide financial information on the form. So for example, a student with married parents who file a joint tax return, that student's going to have two contributors, the student and one parent who can offer consent for their and their partner's financial situation. Both contributors will be asked to provide this consent, and consent is essentially it's an eligibility requirement. It has to be required to qualify for financial aid. But it's essentially granting that permission to transfer the IRS information onto the application so schools can see it. Okay, so we know that the FAFSA is not yet out, and that is, you know, especially if you have already applied for schools and know how this process works, that might be giving you some angst. So we want to talk about what you can be doing right now ahead of the FAFSA being available to get ready for when the FAFSA is available. One thing you can do is just what we were discussing, identifying who those contributors will be on the FAFSA form. And then when those contributors are identified, creating a studentaid.gov account, this can be done ahead of the FAFSA being available. And then finally, you can think about gathering the information you'd need to complete the FAFSA, information about assets, business values, farm values, if those things apply to your family's financial situation. Before we talk about contributors, I want to talk about FAFSA dependency, or really, do I have to put my parents' financial information on the FAFSA? This is, again, a frequently asked question, and I think it is important to just sort of make it as clear as possible whether or not a student has to have their parents' information on the FAFSA. So when we say dependency, what we're sort of getting at is whose information has to be reported when you fill out the FAFSA. If you're a dependent student, you're going to have to report both your and your parents' information. And really, most traditional age college students are dependents. They are required to submit a FAFSA application with their parent information on it. If you're an independent student, you would report your own information. And if you are married, you would report your spouse's information as well. So independent students are over the age of 24, or they meet one of the criteria that are listed on the screen up there. They're perhaps married, a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, or have children they support. That and these other things listed here is what would sort of deem a student independent and not make them be required to have parent information on the FAFSA. If you think as a student that you might be an independent, you know, particularly if you have an estranged relationship with your parents, but don't meet one of the criteria on the screen here, give us a call. We can kind of help navigate the FAFSA and also talk through the situation as to whether or not we think parent information does need to be included, or if you're able to apply without. So again, just to kind of reinforce this is a Department of Education. This is not a Gonzaga thing. This is just across the country how this FAFSA form works, because a dependent student is assumed to have the support of their parents. So that's why the parent information has to be assessed along with the students to get the full picture of the family's resources. If you're a dependent student, it doesn't mean that your parents are required to pay anything towards your education. This information is simply used to sort of assess the maximum amount of financial aid eligibility that a student would have. So the dependency question is important, particularly when we talk about contributors. As I'd mentioned, most traditionally aged college students are going to be required to have parent information on the form, which means that parents are going to be contributors to the FAFSA application. So for FAFSA purposes, a parent means the student's legal, either their biological or adoptive parent, or a person that the state has determined to be the student's legal parent. We have a resource we're going to share in the chat here that is a PDF. We've sort of mirrored this PDF infographic on the screen here to kind of walk through some of the scenarios. This is essentially a flow chart that sort of helps determine who, you know, what parent or parents might be contributors. So First, on the far left there in that white bar, we're going to talk about if the student's biological or adoptive parents are married to each other, their information is going to be included on the FAFSA form. And if the parent's marital status is married, both parents' financial information must be included on the form. If they file taxes jointly, only one parent is required to be a contributor. That parent can essentially consent for that tax information for both parents. But if the student's parents file taxes separately, both are contributors, both will need those FSA IDs. So in that case, if students whose parents are married but file separately, there'll be 3 contributors to the form: the student, parent 1, and parent 2. The next scenario in the middle there is the case that if the student's biological or adoptive parents reside together but are not married, this is a status called unmarried living together. And again, both parents are going to be contributors, even if they were never married. They're going to be contributors because they're residing together. And then finally, on the right, this is the case where the student's parents are not married and do not live together. The parent on the FAFSA is going to be the parent who provided more financial support over the past 12 months. If the parents provided even support, the parent who has greater income or assets is going to be the parent that's required to be the parent on the FAFSA form. And if that parent is remarried, step-parent information is also required on the form. And unless they file taxes jointly, both parents may need those FSA IDs to be contributors. If the parent that's going to be on the FAFSA form is not remarried, there's no additional contributor. It would just be that parent. So this is a lot of information to take in, and I don't blame you if you couldn't kind of follow the logic through there. But rest assured that in the FAFSA, there's a wizard, they're calling it FAFSA, who is my parent wizard, that exists in the FAFSA form. So when the student logs in, they'll be asked some questions to determine which parent should be the FAFSA parent, and make sure that that gets correct. I offer this here mostly to know who kind of needs to be creating FSA IDs. And again, just to reiterate, our financial aid office is happy to kind of talk through that as well. And I do want to just mention one thing, that being a contributor doesn't necessarily mean you're required to contribute financially to the education. Essentially, you're contributing to information that's going on the form. It doesn't, hold you accountable for any financial contribution to a student's education. So let's go ahead and talk about that, how once you've established the contributors, you can go ahead and create a studentaid.gov account, and that can be done today. That you don't need to necessarily wait for the FAFSA application. You can do it as a part of the FAFSA application, but if you're anxious and want to feel like you're doing something to prepare for this, creating one of these accounts might be the way to go. So the first step is to create this account. And again, students and parents are going to need to have individual accounts. And I just want to emphasize that every individual needs their own account. Students are going to need this account not only to do the FAFSA application, but also if they borrow student loans, it's how they would do their entrance counseling and sign master promissory notes. Parents need their own account to consent to have the IRS information transferred, as well as to sort of, if there's other students either this year or in future years who need to do the FAFSA, you could also use that FSA ID to contribute on their FAFSA applications as well. The studentaid.gov account is a requirement to complete the FAFSA application. Parents who don't have social security numbers, there are ways to sort of create the application. So you would need a social security number if you have it, a mobile phone number, and an email address to complete it. So it should be pretty quick. I think it takes 5 minutes or less if you have all that information handy. Okay, so we've established the contributors, we've set up our studentaid.gov accounts. Let's talk about what it's going to look like to complete the FAFSA. Again, the FAFSA is expected to be available by December 31st. And I think that it's a great idea to be paying attention to these sort of things, but I do think that we'll hear about the FAFSA being available from a lot of different angles, both in the general mainstream media and also PR campaigns directly to students to submit the FAFSA application. The Department of Education estimates about an hour to complete the form. And while we'd love for you to complete it as soon as possible, we would rather have accurate information than sort of something that's rushed through. And assuming these dates hold, we're asking students to complete the form by February 1st to have kind of a financial aid offer in the first round of offers that we send out. So available on December 31st. So sometime in the month of January, if you could plan on completing the form, that would be super helpful on our end. Just know the sooner you complete the form, the sooner you'll know kind of what issues you might run into. You can call and ask us questions. The closer you get to the deadlines, the more, the higher volume of either our financial aid offices or the FAFSA hotlines to ask questions. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And one of the things that I just want to emphasize again is it's important that the individual contributors are managing their own sections of the form and their own FSA IDs. So while it may be tempting to share studentaid.gov accounts with each other, this is strongly discouraged. And what I mean here specifically is parents, do not do this for your student, and students do not sort of get the FSA ID from your parent or the studentaid.gov login credentials from the parent. Beyond the obvious ethical issues of claiming to be someone you're not, as particularly on a federal form, the directions on the form are geared towards the role that you're logged in. So when you log in, that's the screen here, you're gonna select whether you're a student, parent, or spouse. So it can get really confusing to try to track all that information. We see this as a pretty frequent mistake. I hope this new upgrade will eliminate some of that. And that's just not a mistake that you want to risk making on this form. You don't want to report parent income as students or mix up a social security number, any of that. It just takes a lot longer to track down. So you're going to log in, you're going to select the appropriate role. And it is our understanding, although the scenario we're going to kind of walk through is from the student perspective, it's our understanding that either the student or the parent can start the form. So if the parent wants to start the form first and send info to the student to have their contributions added, that works, as well as the student starting the form and inviting the parents to contribute. So again, more of a preview of what it's going to look like once you're in the FAFSA. There's a few different sections, and these may change, and information may be abbreviated or eliminated depending on the smart logic that built in the form. But generally speaking, students are going to be asked to provide identity information. They're going to be asked to provide consent, again, to get their tax information. Even if they don't have tax information with the IRS, you're still required to provide consent because that's part of the verification process, is verifying that the IRS doesn't have any income for that particular tax filer. The student's also going to be asked their personal circumstances. This is what's going to help determine their dependency status. And then they're going to be asked to provide that parent information to essentially invite the parent as a contributor. And this is where the FAFSA wizard would also, the parent wizard would also exist, that kind of helps the student determine which parent should be invited on the FAFSA. There's going to be a signature page, it's an electronic signature with that studentaid.gov login credentials, and then they're going to invite the parent or parents to complete their part of the FAFSA form. So the parent then will receive an email from Federal Student Aid. We don't know quite the timing, but I imagine it'll be fairly quick. But we haven't been told explicitly, to my knowledge, sort of how long a parent might have to wait to get this message. The parent's going to log in and kind of get a little onboarding, what to expect from the FAFSA, who contributors are, what to expect sort of filling out the form, and then the next steps once the FAFSA has been completed. Parents are also going to be asked to enter and confirm the demographics, some of which are tied to that studentaid.gov account. then they'll be asked to the consent question to have the IRS data transferred, and then they would submit the form. So the parent is going to then receive a confirmation page after they submit the form, and the page is going to display information about tracking the student's FAFSA and next steps. And then the student will receive an email with the full detailed confirmation, and information will also be sent to the schools that the student designated on their FAFSA form. The FAFSA is considered complete when both the student and the parent sections are submitted and signed and off to the Department of Education for processing. So again, you'll want to submit the FAFSA as soon as it's reasonably possible after it becomes available, no later than February 1st. And while it's not urgent, again, you shouldn't rush to submit it. The sooner you'll have financial information provided, the sooner you would get financial aid packages back, know if you need help. And again, assuming the timeline holds and the FAFSA is available, we're asking students to submit the FAFSA by February 1st. If for some reason the FAFSA doesn't become available on December 31st, we'll communicate from Gonzaga and set a different but very reasonable expectation about when the FAFSA should be submitted. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline. One thing to know is that the FAFSA is going to be available on December 31st, but that information might not make it to schools until January, the end of January, early February. And again, that's a delay related to this changeover to the new FAFSA. Generally speaking, we have the information within a day or two. So that's just kind of, I'm starting in the middle of the timeline. So why don't I back up? So first things first, really applying to the universities that you want to attend, including Gonzaga, is kind of step one. The priority date for the first year application is December 1st, so coming up just in a couple of days here. We do not provide financial aid offers for students who aren't admitted. So again, just reinforcing applying to Gonzaga for admission is one step in this process. The next step, you can kind of submit the FAFSA, get the documents you need, sign up for those studentaid.gov accounts, and apply for financial aid using the FAFSA when it's available. Once your Gonzaga application and the FAFSA have been submitted, you're going to hear back first from the admissions office in late February with an admissions decision. That admissions decisions would include any merit scholarship eligibility. If your student is eligible for a merit scholarship, know that that's just one piece of the financial aid puzzle. That is not a financial aid offer. And then for students who are admitted, they're going to receive a financial aid offer. We hope to have 8 offers out to students by mid-March. Generally, it's towards the end of February. But with the timeline delayed a little bit this year, that's kind of what we're anticipating. But we'll send out communication if for some reason we're not able to have that information out to families by mid-March. And then after that, this is the time that you kind of want to sit down with that financial aid offer with, as a family and decide if Gonzaga is the right fit for you, both financially and overall. And then you will be asked to confirm with Gonzaga. So high level timeline, the key points are apply for admission. You would not receive a financial aid package before learning that you've been accepted to Gonzaga, and mid-March for financial aid offers. So we're going to switch gears and dive into some frequently asked questions. So kind of jumping off that last slide, what happens if the financial aid offer isn't enough? How does the school take into account a drastic reduction of income from 2022 to 2023? These are all kind of have the same answer and are really circling the same question. So the FAFSA is going to require you to submit the 2022 tax information, but we're aware that this may not be accurate reflection of your family's current financial situation. And the process that we have to take that into consideration is a financial aid appeal or special circumstances appeal. You can see some common requests we receive for appeals up on the screen. There's a lot more information on our website as well. And we're in the process of updating it for the 24-25 school year. The website should be updated by January We are in a little bit of a holding pattern, just waiting on information related to this FAFSA simplification changes. It's important to note, though, that we're not going to start processing appeals until mid-March. We ask that students wait to receive their financial aid offers before they appeal. One, we don't have the capacity. It takes a lot of work to get all the financial aid offers out, and that's where we really want to put our attention. And two is we want families to kind of see the complete picture of the financial aid package before sort of requesting an appeal. So the first step is to submit a FAFSA. And once you've done that, you're welcome to connect with the financial aid office about next steps. Another common question related to these FAFSA changes is how are we going to take into consideration that there are multiple siblings in college with the new FAFSA, and would Gonzaga consider this? And the answer is yes, we would consider this through an appeal. And the same, kind of process that I just outlined applies, where you would just let us know that that is your special circumstance, and we will see what we can do to make adjustments and whether or not that impacts financial aid eligibility. Another common question on the FAFSA is around assets. What assets are students required to report or parents required to report? One thing to know first is not everyone is going to be asked to report assets. So if a family qualifies for means tested benefits, which I'll cover here in a few slides, they may not be asked to required to report assets. But if you are presented with the asset question, you would report the annual amount of child support if you received any, your net worth of businesses that you or your family own, the net worth of a farm, including the fair market value of land, buildings, livestock, crops, machinery actively used in investment farms. You would not, either in the case of a farm or just any old family, report the value of your primary residence or retirement accounts. And then let's go ahead and ask about education benefit plans. How are they reported? Coverdell Savings Account 529 plans. In Washington, we have the GET program or Dream Ahead. These are all types of prepaid tuition programs, and they're reported as the parent's asset. The education savings accounts will only be counted as a parent asset if the account is designated for the student. So previously, you would have to report the full value of any asset that the parent had for education, even savings accounts for other children. In the new FAFSA, it would only be the value for the student who's applying for financial aid. And another question, this one came through actually in kind of the pre-webinar questions, is sort of what is means tested benefits? And these are essentially federal programs. And it's a question on the FAFSA to determine whether or not a family has to report assets. So the types of mean tested benefits are up there on the screen. And if anyone in your family has received those in the past 12 months, then there are certain questions that a student and a parent would not be subjected to in the FAFSA application. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause there and see if there are questions from the Q&A that we would like to answer live.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So we have been answering a bunch in the typing and in the chat. So please feel free to look at that. It looks like the only one that we don't currently have someone typing out is our non-retirement investment accounts reported as assets.
Yes, non-retirement investment accounts are reported as assets.
Correct. Another question came in. Do we need to report rental house profits and value in the FAFSA?
You do. The profits would be reported as a part of that tax information that's transferred. The value, yes, you would report that as an asset. It would be the net value, so the value of it minus whatever is owed on it.
Awesome. Next question, and I think they're coming in now more. Does severance pay from a layoff count as income?
I heard it from the Department of Education today. Their line was, if the IRS doesn't tax it, the FAFSA doesn't ask it. So that pertains to income. So if it is on your 2022 income, it would be transferred as a part of the FAFSA process. But if it is not, it wouldn't be. Generally, severance would be kind of part of that wage or in sort of that wage line in my experience. But again, it all depends on what was reported on the tax return.
Awesome. Another question very relevant to the past topic. If parents have 2 kids in college and they report 529 plans for that student, how is that different? Or if it's different than, I'm sorry, I'm trying to reword this. What if my parents have 2 kids in college? How do they report 529 plans if the amount for my benefit is different than the siblings?
The parent would report the amount for that student's benefit on the FAFSA and the siblings benefit on the siblings FAFSA. So if they have 10,000 saved for one and 5,000 for the other, student 1 would have 10,000 reported as part of the assets. Student 2 would have 5,000 reported as part of their assets.
Perfect. Another one relating to 529 plans. If grandparents have the 529 plan in the student's name, how is that reported in which section?
That is probably one you should follow up with us. I'm not sure we've gotten specific direction on that, or I haven't seen it yet. So it would either be reported as a student asset, I think, or not at all, but I would follow up with us when the FAFSA is open, and we'll be able to get you a more firm answer.
Are parent higher education loans for medical school, dental school, or etc. considered in appeals?
That's something we could take a look at. We are required, actually, it's sort of a financial aid regulation that we take all these things case by case. If you think you have an unusual financial circumstances, we are happy to talk you through it. One of the other things we do is just ask a lot of questions about the information provided on the FAFSA to make sure that it's accurate. And we find a lot of people, sometimes over-reporting stuff they don't have to. So don't hesitate to use that appeal form if you think you have an unusual circumstance, and we will see what we can do to go about either updating the FAFSA application and recalculating aid eligibility, or sort of letting you know about other resources that might be available.
Awesome. And then so far, this is our last question to get through. Is the net worth of a business or farm determined off of their taxes?
Net worth, that does not come from the taxes. I think it's just your educated guess about what the value of the farm is. I do not have a farm, so I'm not familiar with how farm values work. I think this is a new question on the FAFSA, so I think we'll get a little bit more guidance. But I don't think that the value of the farm is reported anywhere on the taxes, or it would be information coming over from the taxes.
Another more 529 questions. Do students, or do they report the current value of a 529 account or the value at the end of 2022?
It would be the value as of the date they're doing the FAFSA.
Perfect. Let's see. Is equity in the house considered an asset? So sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Home equity in your primary resident is not considered an asset. If it's equity in a rental property or a vacation home, it would be considered an asset.
Okay, so for parents that have multiple students, this is particularly around a 529 account, but I think this may apply for anyone that has 2 students attending college or that will be applying for need-based financial aid. Do parents then have to submit 2 different FAFSA forms for each student?
Yeah, I would actually rephrase that in that each student has to submit a FAFSA form, and parents would be then contributing twice, 1 for each student.
Okay, great. So we got a question about the CSS profile and Gonzaga requiring it, and we do not require or use the CSS profile. Is that correct?
That is correct. We do not require it. We do not use it. We do not have a mechanism for importing that data.
Awesome. So far, I think we've gotten it all. It looks like we've answered any questions that have since been put in the Q&A, but we may get more. So folks, this is your chance. Oh, Oh, we just got a thank you. You're welcome. I'll hand it back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that this is new for a lot of people. So if you have a lot of questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Also, I think we're going to get more clarification and detail and kind of a lot of information over the next 2 months. So be patient with us, with the process. We are here to help, and just really want to emphasize again, our contact information is up on the screen. We are happy to talk through things. I hope this makes you feel slightly more prepared for what's to come with the FAFSA application, but know that we are committed to getting financial aid packages and information and the best possible financial aid offer we can out to you as quickly as we can on our end. So thank you.
Awesome. So we did get some other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and ask those if you don't mind. We've got one is, how is Social Security dependent income ending at age 18 handled?
So the FAFSA is going to just share information with schools. If it's taxable income, the tax is just going to come straight over from the IRS. If something's changing, like if the benefit ended and the student is no longer receiving it fall 2024 and beyond, that is a great reason for doing appeal. But there's no place on the FAFSA to sort of type out a narrative or let us know that that's actually not right. We're just going to get family information from 2022, and any sort of changes or amendments that you have for that, you would want to do an appeal process. Every school is required to have a similar process too. So while we want to sort of emphasize that we work at Gonzaga and we want you to come to Gonzaga, you may be sort of taking that information to other schools as well, but that's something that we would take into consideration through the appeal process.
Awesome. And I believe the answer will be, sorry, I think we're just trying to go through how to report a rental unit with a huge special assessment.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I fully understand what that means. I think that's probably a reason to get in touch with us ahead of doing the FAFSA, and we can kind of hear a little bit more about that and talk through that.
And then I just want to point out, we do have some questions in coming in that are a little more personal and are very going to be dependent on the family circumstances. So just as a reminder, please feel free to reach out to our financial aid office to have those more detailed conversations about your specific situation and circumstances. And Sarah has said it many times, and I'll reiterate it again. We are always happy to chat with and meet with families and students to talk about individual circumstances.
Alexa, why don't I go ahead and just say the parent who's on the FAFSA isn't necessarily the parent that claims you on their tax returns. So that is just something to keep in mind. That's not like an automatic that, okay, if my parents don't live together and aren't married, the parent who claims me isn't automatically the FAFSA parent. That's where that FAFSA parent wizard will come in pretty handy.
Perfect. And then we did get another question. If the new form requires the tax info to come directly from the IRS, is there a way to view the data that's being pulled to ensure accuracy?
There is not a way for students and parents to view the data coming from the IRS. They are trusting that it is accurate. If you have unusual circumstances and have reason to believe that maybe it's not accurate, I think it will be, but if you have reason to believe that it's not, again, that's a great reason to get in touch with us through that appeal process, and we can, we'll, as schools, have the ability to view it and can kind of walk through that and confirm that it's up to date.
Perfect. We've got a question about something being on the FAFSA page. I'm not positive on what that person is referring to, but if you're referring to this presentation and this webinar, it is being recorded and will be available on Gonzaga's website as well. It will be emailed to students and any parent and guardians that we have information for. Let's see. So we have a question about a change of income. If a parent is getting paid less this year than they had in previous years, what the circumstances are for applying for financial aid.
wait to get your financial aid letter, and then you can submit an appeal. And essentially that's just a change in financial circumstance, and just let us know that there's been a change, and we would sort of see if we need to make updates to the FAFSA, and if so, reevaluate financial aid eligibility based on those updates.
Awesome. I think we got through them all. Maybe not. If an undergraduate student files their taxes independently and are not claimed on a parent's taxes, are they still considered dependent on the FAFSA?
That is correct. They are dependent on the FAFSA. Financial independence is not one of the dependency criteria. It's age, it's marriage, it's other sort of circumstance, but financial independence is not a dependency factor on the FAFSA.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again this evening for this webinar. Again, we understand that there are many questions and that finances, as Sarah said, can be deeply personal. So we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today, but always know that the Office of Admission and the Financial Aid Office is always available to answer any questions or concerns that you may have regarding need-based financial aid or any types of scholarships at Gonzaga. So I'm going to ask some of my colleagues in the chat to put in the contact information for the admissions office and how to get in contact with your counselor. You can see still on your screen here the contact information for the financial aid office. So please, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out at any time, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.